and your future. This is The Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to The Means Report. We certainly appreciate you spending part of your day with us as we continue to tackle the headlines that continue to change every day. For the first few months of the year, it was the pandemic. Now we've transitioned into protests, and we're all wondering what happens next during this key election year. And we're going to cover those topics today on our show, and we can't think of a better person to do it with than the congressman from Georgia's 9th District. He's Doug Collins, kind enough to join us today to talk about the divide in our country, to look at police reform and what's on the horizon for that, and to take a look at the situation in Atlanta and what he thinks should happen with the recent incidents and controversies in our capital city. And he is joining us now from Capitol Hill. Congressman Collins, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Thanks so much. Good to be with you, Brad.
Congressman, my first question is really just a general one, and I guess we could probably spend the entire show answering it, but just try to give us a feel from your perspective in D.C. When is our country going to start to feel normal again? A lot of viewers saw you in the spotlight during the impeachment hearings, and ever since then it feels like this nation is just upside down.
It is, right? And I think it's really concerning. You know, just as a citizen, but as a father, as someone who's still in the military, someone and especially being in politics up here on Capitol Hill, everything seems to be up in the air. Someone once told me that in life you can only keep so many balls up in the air. You're juggling life all the time, but when all the balls are up in the air, it's a state of sort of uncertainty that nobody knows which is going to land first. And what we've seen over the last 18 months, and you brought up impeachment, you brought up the investigations, I think that led right into a very disconcerting part of a polarization of America. Then you went right into the virus, in which kept everybody at home, and that pent-up frustration and that pent-up anger of not being able to get out and not being able to go in. And once we did get out, we had frankly the murder of Mr. Floyd up in Minneapolis. We had the situation with Mr. Aubrey in Brunswick, and now people are very frustrated and they're getting out. And unfortunately, some of that civil discourse is spilled over into anarchy, into just baseless criminal activity. So we are at a difficult time, but we can come through this, and I'm a firm believer that cooler heads and common sense can prevail.
What's the timetable for that stuff to prevail, though? We saw Georgia approve a hate crimes law just this week. The Senate in your neck of the woods tried to, but failed on its try yesterday. When do you think that we'll start to see some of these measures that lawmakers are taking kick in so that there is more calm?
Well, again, I think that those are helpful items, and I think we need to get police reform done. And there's things that actually can work. As a son of a Georgia State trooper, and I've been around the policing world all my life, and there are things that need to happen. We need to provide, more transparency and accountability for our police departments, so that the bad police officers can be gotten rid of quicker. They can be moved on, can enforce and reinforce the training of the good officers so that communities can have faith. But I want to go back to something really what you sort of talk about. When will this end? I think it's beyond really laws. Laws are only as good as the people who actually will look at those laws and say, I will abide by them. What we're missing right now is trust. I pastored for a long time in counseling situations. What I told many times when people were having disagreements, couples or others, I would tell them the very thing that you need is the very thing that's broken. And our country right now needs trust in each other. We need to renew that trust, that we can disagree civilly, that we can still have passionate political arguments, but at the end of the day realize that we're all still Americans, we're all still Georgians, and at the end of the day can come together and say what is the best solution. But right now, with the heightened fears and heightened anxieties, it's going to take us a little time. But I believe with good common sense conversation, with having dialogue back and forth, holding each other accountable in those ways, then I think we can move forward.
Congressman Collins, please talk about the situation in Atlanta with the shooting of Rashard Brooks. The district attorney in Fulton County has charged one of the officers with murder. You do not think that is the right move. What would you say, especially to the folks who've seen that video and say, how could it not be? We see the officer shoot the guy, shoot the man, dead.
Well, in fact, the video is actually the reason why I'm so concerned about this. This is not the killing of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis. This is not an officer who has a bound suspect with his knee on his neck for over 8.5 minutes. This is a situation that evolved over a 45-minute time period when it became obvious that an arrest was being made. Mr. Brooks fought back. There was a confrontation. Those are the things that need to be investigated. What I have a problem with is Paul Howard as DA, who's in the middle of a runoff re-election, and is going at it from a perspective of having no investigation done, not taking this to a grand jury, and this deciding on his own that we're going to make charges before the investigation is done. We just talked about a moment ago, how do we heal in our country? We've got to have healing on both sides. Our police officers to protect us and do the things that they're supposed to do should be given the same due process and understanding from the district attorney's office as anybody else does. And if we don't have that, if the prosecutorial actions of a DA in Fulton County become political, then we are losing the rule of law. And that has to come back in. So I'm encouraging him to do the right thing, step aside in this case, let the Attorney General appoint someone, or that there will be more pressure put on him by state officials and others.
What would you say to folks who are reluctant to go to Atlanta right now? I have some folks here in Augusta who've said there's no way they'd go to the Capitol right now considering the climate. I saw something last night where there was a person standing at the spot where Rashard Brooks was killed, and he said the police are not welcome here anymore. Who's in charge there?
That's a great question. I mean, that's a question for Mayor Bottoms. You know, where is she in this situation? Where is the police chief? I mean, are we allowing a sort of occupation zone, if you would? I understand last night there was possibly some movement in that to clear that out, and the police were possibly involved in that, and that's still developing. But again, you know, and if the mayor won't handle it, the governor I know could handle it, but this is not here. We cannot have an autonomous zone anywhere in this country that says simply we're going to take over and go out without a rule of law and have mob rule. And right now, I would say people going to Atlanta, I've gone back and forth there, you know, we need to take steps out, but also there is these areas of caution that I think the police are going to have to step up and take responsibility to get it fixed. But it is, again, goes back to that trust issue, and people believe that when you have a neighborhood that is upset, you have police who are fearful to do their job because they don't believe they'll be backed up in any situation. It presents a really troublesome picture.
As the son of a trooper, do you think better training is going to be a huge step to fix all of this if those officers go out and do their jobs with a new mindset thanks to different training?
I think training never hurts. It's almost like education. Education is one of the greatest equalizers we have for anyone going out and learning. And look, the thing also we have to understand here is I'll even say 99.9% of all the officers do it right. We're always discussing the ones who do it wrong, and rightfully so. Just like we would do a bad politician, a bad news reporter, or anybody else. We always end up having to discuss what happens in the exceptions. But the rule is that most of these men and women show up every day and do their job professionally. They do it in very tough situations. But there also has to be a key component here. There has to be an understanding of society that the police are there to keep civil order, and the community is there to also abide by that civil order in a way that can hopefully crack down on these confrontations and, again, restore a sense of peace in our communities instead of this disruption. I think we've experienced 6 months of extreme disruption, and we're going to have to come back to that. But training is always a good thing. And accountability. One of the things we've seen in Washington, D.C. is to actually hold accountable, especially in some of the bigger cities where you have rules and bylaws and the unions that keep people from being fired. Bad officers need to be fired. They need to be held criminally liable when they have done criminal acts. But we cannot just simply allow it to be non-transparent where they can go and continue to do what they've been doing.
Congressman Doug Collins from Georgia's 9th Congressional District up around Gainesville, his hometown, is our special guest today on the Means Report. When we come back, we're going to continue to talk about the state of our country, including what should happen to people who don't uphold that civility, if you will, that Congressman Collins talked about, people who destroy monuments, who burn our flag. The president says they should go to jail. What does he think? And what happens from here as Election Day gets closer? On the Means Report, Congressman Doug Collins from the 9th Congressional District of the great state of Georgia. Congressman Collins, I want to ask you about something the president mentioned this past week when it comes to punishments for people who deface monuments, who burn the American flag. He says they should go to jail. What do you think?
Well, anyone who destroys public property is involved in a criminal act. This is not a part of civil disobedience in writing. What we're seeing is a move to the writing phase or the criminal aspect of this. And again, if we're simply trying to cancel culture I mean, up here in Washington, D.C., we've actually tried to see them destroy the Lincoln Emancipation Monument, which was a tribute to the freedom of the slaves and been breaking the bondage of slavery. We've seen monuments across the country of George Washington and others, and then also with other leaders in the Confederacy and others that are being taken down. The question is you can't simply just take down monuments to solve a problem that we're having here. And those need to be punished so that we can actually have civil discourse and dialogue on how we deal with our history and our past so that we can become better.
Do you think that Stone Mountain is going to be there in 10 years, the monument to leaders of the Confederacy?
I think it probably will be, but it's also as a learning point and a touchstone for a nation that was divided by hatred and race and should never. We look forward to the day as we move forward as a peaceful people together, look forward to where we came in our history and where we are now in a society that I learned as a child in church that said red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Those are the kind of things and the values that we need to continue. We learn from the past and we move forward to a better one.
Amen. You know, I want to ask you, just as we sort of put a bow on the part of our conversation about the protests and the unrest, don't you think really in your heart of hearts that we're not going to have any real peace in this country until after the election, no matter who wins? Because it seems like everyone's just waiting for that.
Yeah, you've touched on it perfectly there. That is exactly what's happened, because I've dealt with it for 18 months up here, and really almost coming up on 2 years, because it was in November of 18 that unfortunately they decided that this was going to be about the 2020 election in Congress. It was not going to be about legislating. It was not going to be about governing. It was going to be about political statements against this administration. And so we have just dealt with that now on and off, and continually more on than off. So I think November 3rd will be a very deciding day for our country, and you know, hopefully we can be able to have that election and move forward as we go forward. I look forward to the president being reelected, and getting back to the business of running the country.
You know, as we record this edition of the Means Report, we're seeing a spike in coronavirus cases across the country. I kind of felt like we were leaving the pandemic, at least part one of it, behind us. Do you think a second wave is coming, and is this nation ready for it?
I'm not sure it's a second wave. I think you're going to see more people, test positive as we get out and go more. Again, the issue that we're seeing here in Georgia is there may be more positives, but we're seeing highs in different areas. We're not seeing the spike. We're seeing that in some places, and that's just something that we can continue to work on until there's a vaccine, until this becomes the more of a norm and people continue to learn how to get back out and how to protect themselves. We're going to still see this, but I'm confident that right now it's also being it's interesting to me is that only using percentages of increases in many of these states and not the actual number. I saw some numbers in which they, the numbers had increased over 50 or 100 people, but yet in a state of several million, those are smaller numbers. But it looks a lot bigger when you say there's been a 50% increase or a 30% increase as you go forward. And we're seeing that across the country. And look, I think it's going to go up and down until we can actually get that vaccine and get a better handle on it like we do with other viruses.
Yeah, I think so too. Do you think the state of Georgia would be willing to shut down again? It seems like people would be really reluctant to do that.
I would hope not. I mean, I don't see the reason. I've traveled the state for the past few weeks, and it is amazing that, you go to some parts of the state that were not really affected by the virus at all, and it seems like nothing was ever, changed. And then, of course, you go to some of our cities, Augusta, Macon, Atlanta, you're seeing a little more of caution as you go along. I think you're going to see, as numbers come back out, that people are wanting to get out. I was just up in the Northeast Georgia mountains, a city called Helen, which is a lot of tourist destinations. I didn't realize it was the third most popular tourist destination in the state of Georgia, and their businesses up there are saying they're seeing 30 and 40% increases in people getting out, and that if it continues like this through the rest of the year, they will actually be ahead of last year, even with 2 months of the virus shutdown. So people are ready to get out. They're ready to get back to normal as best as normal can be, and that's what I would hope to see in the rest of the state.
Yeah, I had a friend who took his son to a golf tournament up in your neck of the woods at a Shasta near Gainesville, and he said people were out and about and seemed to be having a good time and being responsible. What about college? What about high school? What are you doing with your children, and should we all try to send our kids back in the fall?
Yeah, what I'm trying to do with mine is I got two the University of Georgia that I'm trying to convince them to understand that college is a 4-year plan, not further, and get them out of college. But I'm ready to get them back in. I mean, as a dad, that's a simple plea from a dad's heart. But, schools need to come back in. We need to make arrangements for it. It may mean that they get their meals in the room. There may be other issues that they have to deal with. But society needs to try and attempt to get back to normal. And school is a very, very big function of that, not just because, my wife just retired after 30 and a half years of teaching. She retired in the pandemic. It was very hard for her because she loved her kids and didn't get to see them as she normally would. But you lose a year, you lose a half a year. And some of these young minds in K through, 12 in particular, but especially K through 5, you're doing, I think, very damaging results to the educational progress of some of these young boys and girls. And we need to make sure that we're trying to do our best to get them back into a classroom where they can grow and respond not only socially, but also in their studies as well. You'll probably see some blended coming up with those willing to come and then those who are still doing online. But I was looking forward to the colleges and universities all getting back, using precautions that they need to during this time, but getting back into class.
So that means football too, right?
I hope so. I'm a sports fan. I like to watch all kinds, and UFC and Korean baseball has been great. But I'm ready for the SEC. I'm ready for the Dogs and the others to start playing again. And I jokingly say I get this question a lot recently, and they said, "What do you think about football coming back?" And I said, "Well, they probably could lock 90-something thousand fans out of Sanford Stadium, but I'm not sure they're going to take 90,000 people out of Athens on a game day." So I'm hopefully it'll come back.
Boy, I hope so too. Congressman Doug Collins, you've been so generous with your time. I know you're slammed right now, and we sure do appreciate you taking a few moments to be with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and it's been a great questions, great time to be with you.
Thank you so much. All the best to you, Congressman. We appreciate your service.